would be that v prime over n is equal to 1, but the social optimum would be v prime is equal to 1. So, graphically, if v prime is like this, there's declining marginal utility. V prime being equal to n, if n was large, would be like sorry, this is oh yeah, v prime being equal to n would give you this point over here, a very low quantity, but v prime being equal to 1 would give you down here, which would be a very high quantity, right? And as n gets larger, this is going to go further and further up, and you're going to get fewer and fewer contributions being made, right? Because each person only gets 1/n of the total value to society, right? And so this is exactly the same result as we just described. The problem is, each person, if they reduce their price, gets the full reduction in price, but only a small part of the value of the increase in quantity, right? Similarly to here, everyone who contributes to charity gets the full cost of having to pay for the charity, but only a tiny part of the social benefit associated with that, right? So everybody is going to free ride and hope that other people make the costly contributions which benefit them. Right?
A lot of people donate to chapter.
Well, we'll talk about that in a moment. But, so this is called the collective action problem. So in a large population with voluntary contribution, quote-unquote public goods are going to become arbitrarily underprovided. That is, the gap between what's socially efficient and what's an equilibrium is going to become arbitrarily large. Okay, but what exactly is it that makes something a quote-unquote public good in the sense that I just described it? Edward? What's the definition of a public good?
I mean, it's like something that like everybody can enjoy without like competing with each other.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So there were two parts of what Edward said. One was without competing with each other, and the other was everybody can enjoy. And I just want to break those into two parts. The first one is that everybody can enjoy it. Right? Or sorry, that they don't compete with one another. And this is the biggest part. So this is called being non-rival. That means one person receiving the benefit does not preclude other people from receiving that benefit. That is, there's zero marginal cost of supplying to additional people. The second is that everybody can enjoy it, that there's no way to keep anyone from enjoying it. That's called being non-excludable. And that's of secondary importance, but it's still important. So everyone receives the benefit regardless of what they do. They don't have to pay anything, they can always access it. So examples that fail the first condition, that are somewhat rival but are non-excludable, are called congestible public goods. So you can't keep people out, but still it's harmful to have too many people there. The second, things that are that fail the second condition, which are non-rival but you can exclude people from, are called excludable public goods. Intellectual property is an example of this, potentially at least, if it's possible to keep people from using the products which you have a patent on, right? Because there's no additional cost of distributing music more broadly, but it may be possible to keep people who don't pay from using the music. So this is really more of an issue of the cost of excluding people. For almost any product, if you spend enough money, you could exclude people, right? But it may be so costly to do that that it's not worth it. And music seems to be moving from the realm of being sort of an excludable public good to being a pure public good recently. because it's becoming so hard to stop people from stealing music, right? So, at least as important, I think, in the definition of a public good, even though these are the traditional criteria, is whether the individual person in the population knows the value that they place on the product better than any social or business authority would. So one thing that defined the intellectual property that we talked about is that there was some entrepreneur who had a great idea, who was going to create a product that he thought everyone was going to love. You know, Steve Jobs created the iPhone, he thought everyone was going to love it, and even if they didn't love it initially, he had the confidence that eventually they were going to come around to it. Usually public goods are going to be things where, like, at the moment that we're thinking about creating them, members of the population have a much better sense, at least potentially, of how much they value them than any individual person would. So they're public not just in the sense of how they can be used, but also in terms of who knows about the value associated. Okay, so Michael, what are some examples of a pure public good? Look up.
Not none. Like, park.
Okay, so let's think about that. Is it non-rival? Can a park get too crowded? I think it probably can, right? I mean, a giant park might be non-rival.
So could we say like the air?
Yeah, I think the air is pretty close. Like air quality, that's pretty close to a pure public good. Does anyone else have any other ideas? Yes, Steve.
National defense.
Yeah, national defense is a good example. That's sort of, you know, you enjoying your national defense doesn't really stop anyone else in the country from enjoying it.
The ocean.
Yeah, environmental services, right? Like weather, right? Like it being warm for one person doesn't really change whether it's warm for somebody else. The existence value of some goods, like a culture or an environmental service, you know, just the benefit of living in a humane society, like which a lot of charities help bring, right? So, and just straight up ideas, right? Stuff that's not even intellectual property, just like an idea or a fact or something, that's almost impossible to keep from spreading, right? The Nazis certainly tried. Yeah, Ben.
Well, I thought charities would be like excludable because like you have congestion in it.
Well, I
Like,
don't.
You could only allocate.
Not in terms of enjoying the benefit of them. So I mean, I agree. Charities sort of bring two types of benefits, right? One type of benefit that a charity brings is like if it gives money directly to some poor person, that poor person directly benefits. But charities also give a benefit indirectly to the rest of the population because they don't like to see people be impoverished, right? And that sort of a benefit is neither excludable nor rival, right?
Because everyone else benefits
Yeah.
from one person.
Exactly.
So you could also say like the national weather. I don't know. Whoever like don't like all weather channels get their like weather data from one national.
Yeah, that's a good example. So like that's sort of a classic example of sort of ideas or facts or scientific progress. Those sorts of things are like not rival. They're almost impossible to exclude people from, right? Okay. What about congestible public goods, Jace? What are some examples of public goods that are congestible?
Like you're saying, parks.
Yeah. Any other ideas? Things that the government provides that are sort of public goods but are congestible.
Public roads.
Yeah. Public infrastructure generally is a great example of congestible stuff. So like roads and bridges are very congestible. Amenities like lakes, parks, national parks or city parks. And how about excludable public goods, Anthony? What are some examples of goods that are not rival but can easily be excluded?
Well, excludable goods would be like software and stuff.
Yeah, those are pretty easy to track whether someone's using them or not, right? Because we have good technologies for doing that. but they're totally non-rival because they can be copied for free, right? Another example of this might be, so land reform. When you have like a big hacienda owner in Latin America, and he has like a lot of tenant farmers, if you decide to break up that estate, it's basically, basically nobody is going to benefit by not giving that those pieces of property to the people who've been farming them, because like the other person who's in the adjoining plot who could take them over isn't going to benefit nearly as much as the person who already knows that land. So they're pretty close to non-rival to give it to everyone. But of course, if there's someone who's politically unpopular, you can obviously exclude them from the benefits of the land reform. Right? Yeah?
I have a question. So, for instance, in Europe with the social health care,
Yeah.
would it be congestible? Do you want the states to be more of a political because it's not excludable, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think that healthcare is pretty much a private good. In other words, it's both rival. It's like if you use a doctor, then he has less time for me, and it's excludable because you can easily keep someone out of the system. So I think healthcare is pretty much a private good. But it might have some public good aspects because I don't want to see starving people or people dying on the streets, right? So in that sense, it might have some of a public good aspect. But just the direct health benefits are mostly a private good, I think. Michael, do you have a question?
Yeah. I'm having a little trouble, like,
Yep.
I guess, separating the rival and excludable.
Yeah.
If something is like a congestible good, doesn't that automatically, like, for example, if your park is congested, doesn't that take the benefit away from, like, people who want to go into the park?
It does, but the point is, if you don't have, if you can't keep people from going into the park, then even though it sucks that there's a lot of people in the park, still it's going to be very hard to keep people from making the park suck by having so many people going to it. And that's true with roads too. Like roads, even though they get congested, it's like proved really, really hard to keep them from getting congested by charging people to go on to them. You know what I mean? So congestible has to do with control over entry without causing the problems of congestion. You know what I mean? And excludable has to do, and rival has to do with how bad things get if a lot of people are on there, regardless of whether you can keep people off or not. You know what I mean? These are only public goods, but at least as important is what I would call public bads, which at some points in these slides, because of my crappy spell checker, got replaced by public bars, and that definitely is not what I was meaning to refer to. Though those could be viewed as public goods, possibly excludable and rival though. But anyway, so public bads are things that bring diffuse harms rather than benefits. So one example of that is land takings, right? So imagine that we want to build like a military base to bring a public good, right? That will often bring a public bad to all the people whose land needs to be taken to build that base, right? And why is it a public bad? Well, because there's usually hundreds of people whose land has to be taken away. So it's not just one person who's being affected, but if it's going to be done, all of those people are going to be affected, right? A lot of land assembly is actually a huge issue in many countries. For example, in Colombia right now, they're trying to build infrastructure and they don't have a system of eminent domain where they can take land. And it's very, very hard for them because basically that ends up meaning that they have to pay enormous prices in order to purchase the land that they need to build roads and bridges and things like that. Corporate acquisitions are another example of that, right? If someone wants to buy a company, they want to buy all the shares of the company, right? And that's going to hurt, or it's going to cost something to all the people who currently own the shares of the company. And it's not possible for one of those people to just give up their shares. They all have to do it at the same time. So the harms that brings are sort of non-rival and non-excludable, right? That they accrue to a lot of different people at the same time. Debt settlements are another example of that. So this has been a huge issue in the foreclosure crisis, right? there were tons of people who owned parts of all these